So, you've done your UCAT, you've got your results, what now? So today I'm going to be delving into how to use your UCAT score strategically in order to maximise your chances of getting into medical school. Some of you may have scored slightly lower on the UCAT than you may have hoped. I was in this position a few years back, and I want to give some advice to you to make sure you can still get those offers. I actually ended up getting all 4 of my medical school offers when I applied, and I'd say that a big part of this is because I used my UCAT strategically and I was realistic with which medical schools would accept me. For this, it's really important to know how the different medical schools use the UCAT because many of them use it differently. So today I'll be discussing how medical schools use the UCAT differently, then what your score even means in the first place, so gauging how high or low it is, and then from there deciding on what sort of strategy to use your UCAT to your advantage and maximise your chances of getting into medical school. I'll throw in a few example unis to give you some ideas of where you can apply. So the UCAT is used differently by different medical schools. So in some, the different candidates will be ranked and only the top ones will be invited for interviews. In others, they will be looking at everybody and apply a cutoff. So anybody with a score below that will be immediately discarded. And then they'll be looking at the rest based on the other things on their application. Some medical schools will be looking at your results holistically alongside everything else. So, for example, if you've done really well in your predictions or your GCSEs, that can really make up for a slightly poor performance in the UCAT. So, what does your UCAT score mean? So, a UCAT score of around 650 is generally seen as good. The thing is, though, that really varies year on year and on where you are. What you really need to closely look at is the deciles. So this is how you've performed compared to your cohort. So a high UCAT score is generally considered something that is in the top 2 deciles, so in the top 20%. An average UCAT score is something between 620 and 630 as an average. A low UCAT score is generally 610 or below. The thing is, even though that's on the lower side of things, there's still a decent chance you can still get into medical school with that score. I know people who had scores like this and are currently in medical school now. So if you do end up with a slightly lower score, just be realistic with it and strategic in where you apply. So now I'll be running through some score-based strategies. Right, so with a lower UCAT score, the main thing you first need to do is avoid any cutoff points. So some universities will have these. This may either be for the numerical sections or for bands in the situational judgment. So once you've avoided these cutoffs, avoid unis which rank UCAT scores or solely uses to decide interviews. So a main one that comes to mind is Bristol, but this really doesn't work to your favour. Try to choose something which gives a larger weighting to other things in your application, be your GCSEs, your predicted A-levels, your personal statement, or the SJT if you've done well on this. So I'm just going to quickly whiz through some of my top suggestions. So the first one is Cardiff, and that's because Cardiff only really uses the UCAT in borderline cases. So first they'll just give points based on your top 9 GCSEs, and then from there they'll look at your personal statement and reference. So this determines whether you'll get an interview, and it's only in borderline cases between being called for an interview or getting an offer where they'll consider the UCAT at all. Kiel is also a good option because they have relatively low cutoffs, so they'll discard the bottom 20% and those scoring a band 4 on the SJT. From there, the UCAT will not really be considered unless it's a borderline case. Belfast is also good if you're trying to hide a low UCAT score because they use a points-based system which combines academics and the UCAT score, but the UCAT only contributes 6 points out of a total of 42. Therefore, it has a relatively smaller contribution and the GCSEs are a much greater focus. Lincoln Medical School uses a system a bit like Nottingham, but it's a bit less competitive. So what they include is your GCSE scores, your UCAT scores, which are kind of given different numbers of points based on the bands they fall in. So if you have between 601 and 700 points, you'll get the same number of marks for that section. They also additionally give points based on your SJT band, with band 1 getting the most points. That way, as it's all combined together, this can make up for a slightly weaker performance in some of the UCAT. You could also consider Plymouth University Peninsula Medical School because they have quite a low cutoff. So in 2020, this was 597, and this year it's supposed to be around 600. They also don't use the SJT, so you don't need to worry if you've done badly in this. Post-interview, they will only consider your interview score when deciding to make an offer as well. So my last suggestion is Liverpool. They use 3 different stages. So the first one is they'll consider your GCSEs. If you hit their minimum threshold, they'll then consider a combination of your GCSEs and UCAT, in which the UCAT is only 25%. And from there, it's the interview stage, and that's separate. So you can make up for a lower UCAT, and supposedly a score of 600 was considered competitive in the past. If you got a high UCAT, congratulations, you're in a great position and there's lots of choice, including unis I couldn't really consider. So it's really wise to use the UCAT to your advantage though, so ones which rank people and give you an edge because you have a high UCAT are ones that are preferable for you to apply to, and this can even make up for lower predictions or GCSEs. So I'm just going to run through a few suggestions if you have a high UCAT. For Bristol, they look at you and decide whether to interview you solely based on the UCAT, so you'd be wise to have a good score. So in 2020, the average successful applicant had a UCAT score of 2821, whereas the lowest interviewed applicant had 2690. King's is a great university to apply to if you had a high UCAT score. I was considering applying to this, but because my UCAT wasn't as high as I was hoping, I ended up not applying. King's use the UCAT contextually, so they have a more holistic viewpoint, but even so, their average interviewee had a score of 2745. So Newcastle favours applicants with a high UCAT score, and that's because they have a high cutoff, which was 2730 in 2021. And this is good because there'll be fewer applicants with this score that are being compared. And so you won't be compared to people who potentially have better GCSEs but just a lower UCAT score. So for Sheffield, applicants that meet their minimum academic requirement and who score over 2420 will then be ranked just based off the UCAT. And then it's the top scorers who will be invited for an interview. And so in 2021, that meant their cutoff was 2740, which is really high. So in this case, having a really high UCAT will work in your favour. The thing is, it's different for each of the medical schools, and you need to look at their specific entry requirements based on your score. Hopefully that was useful, and it will help you if you didn't get as good a score as you hoped. So like me, I really hope that being slightly more strategic and realistic with your score means that you'll be in medical school sometime soon. If you found this video useful, please like and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. In fact, I get really excited whenever somebody new subscribes.